Conclusions. Firstly, there are a number of difficulties that I have with Against Method. 1. Feyerabend is drawing conclusions about science. If the book was written with the intent of having an effect on the scientific community, then his conclusions should be assessed in the same way as any scientific theory. Thus, if the scientific community or affiliated communities are to act on Feyerabend's conclusions, then those same conclusions should be validated through appropriate studies, else there is the potential for resources to be wasted. 2. The conclusions from 1 can be generalized to the entire field of the philosophy of science, if this field informs the practice of science. Thus, in the philosophy of science, there should be at least 2 domains of conclusions. A. Those that are entirely theoretical. These would consist of theories or hypotheses about how science works. In a similar vein to the hierarchical evidence-based used in review articles in the Cochrane database, they should be assigned a value corresponding to a judgment of their validity. B. Those that are tested empirically. Again, there are different gradations of evidence and specificity of evidence which could be utilized. 3. A clearly defined field within science could be developed which incorporates the methods of philosophical inquiry and which would be concerned with theory generation, hypothesis generation, theory refinement and analysis of methodology and related areas. This discipline would be represented within each branch and sub-branch and would be conducted by scientists with training in this area as well as by philosophers recruited into this area. 4. I found the book could benefit from a clearer structure. While short statements begin each chapter, the subsequent assumptions and chains in the argument were difficult to find as they were interspersed with discussion and insights. I have observed a similar style being used in psychotherapy papers that I have reviewed, but it makes it difficult to analyse the material and to get to the point quickly. 5. Feyerabend does not consistently divide science up into its constituent parts. A. The scientific process. 1. The ideal scientific process. 2. The actual scientific process, constituting social and anthropological aspects. B. The body of scientific knowledge. C. The image of science. By using these concepts interchangeably, and at times confusing them with wider culture, there are opportunities for developing a misinterpretation. 6. In the introduction to the Chinese version, and in later references to China, Feyerabend describes the effects of a monoculture on a different civilization when referring to science. A. He confuses science with culture. B. A socio-political trend is used to support his arguments for a multiplicity of methods, a trend which has been reversed at the time of writing. C. He selects from the culture those aspects which fit with his arguments, but neglects significant scientific developments in Chinese culture independent of Western science, which supports the notion that science, or the rudiments of science, represents a universal human activity. 7. Feyerabend states that his purpose in writing the book is not intellectual but humanitarian. This follows from his belief in 5 that science is a pursuit which suppresses alternative traditions. Nevertheless, as noted in the previous point, in this argument he is confusing culture with science. Indeed, he later writes that the way in which science is used is decided on by the culture. If this holds, then it suggests that his book is written on the basis of false premises, a confusion of science with the perceived use to which it is put to by society. 8. Feyerabend refers to the hardest sciences and implicitly refers to a hierarchy within science which he makes no attempt to qualify. 9. Despite asserting that the book is written on humanitarian grounds, Feyerabend repeatedly writes dismissive comments about medicine. Such is the brevity of the statements and their nature that I have referred to them as pseudo-philosophy, in that the statements masquerade as philosophy by repeatedly appearing in a book about the philosophy of science, but are not justified by either reason or evidence. 10. Feyerabend criticizes rational argument as a political maneuver, and yet rational arguments constitute a significant portion of his book in his efforts to persuade the reader that anything goes. 11. Feyerabend's support of a languageless element in science circumvents the burden of proof that is required in the shared communication that is part of the scientific process. 12. Anything goes is a vague phrase. While it infers tolerant values, in concrete terms it does not sufficiently inform actions at a group or organisational level. While on an individual level different approaches will suit different people's needs, at the organisational level the absence of a structured approach will create the possibility of duplication and other inefficiencies. The absence of a direction in the form of strategies or goals makes evaluation difficult. 13. Feyerabend chooses Galileo as the subject of his inquiries. This choice has potential drawbacks. A. There are no living witnesses to the events described. B. He, and therefore we, are dependent on a translation of an Italian text. C. We are dependent on a translation of a text from the 17th century. D. Feyerabend selects the material to use in his arguments, introducing possible confirmation bias. E. Feyerabend undermines the credibility of Galileo's writings at several points, although these serve as the central focus for his arguments. F. Feyerabend does not appropriately consider the effect of cultural sensitivities on Galileo's writings. G. Galileo's achievements are judged on the basis of his selected writings, and yet much of his thinking may have remained undocumented. H. The focus on a single period and area of activity cannot be representative of all of science. 14. Feyerabend uses Galileo's drawings of the lunar landscape as evidence of faulty equipment, and yet Galileo himself apparently expressed a wish to return to draw the lunar landscape to take into consideration confounding factors. 15. Feyerabend negates the considerable number of telescopic observations that Galileo is purported to have made in establishing an empirical basis for his works, and also in the development of an intuition. 16. There is no focus on the considerable period of time over which the possibility that the Earth moved had been considered. Indeed, it had been considered by the ancient Greeks and was therefore one of the competing theories to the established view which Galileo came to challenge. 17. Feyerabend has argued in a dichotomous manner that the theory by Copernicus was in trouble because it had been challenged. It would not be unreasonable to suppose that every significant theory has been challenged, and it does not necessarily mean that it is in trouble. 18. Again, in a dichotomous manner, Feyerabend argues that falsification would destroy science. In practice, the effects of conflicting facts on a theory is a matter of judgment, and this would be expected to occur in a probabilistic manner. 19. The suggestion that the physiology of the ancient Greeks differed from our own is highly speculative, and the example of Egyptian canonical art supports the argument that art can be used for a specific purpose by society, and that can impact on how art is expressed. This favours the impact of culture of biology over biology in this particular case. Feyerabend has again chosen a point in the distant past, which is less than ideal for closer inspection. 20. A number of Feyerabend's arguments are not supported by empirical evidence when it is clear that this would strengthen his speculation. 21. Much of Feyerabend's discussion crosses into interpretation of ancient history, which is contested elsewhere, and which moves the focus away from a philosophical inquiry into science.